Well, hey, Chris, man, we're back on the podcast. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's good to be here. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, I'm doing good. We had a couple nights this week where the baby got more sleep than usual, so it just like, man, you wake up feeling like $1,000,000 when you get like
Yeah,
a good
you're on your
stretch.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Listen, our viewers and our listeners, you're probably wondering, where's Dean? Why isn't Dean on our little chat here? But Dean was actually one of your guests this week. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a great chat. So we're celebrating 30 years of Impactus this fall, which is very exciting. And just we wanted to take some time to reflect on the journey of the ministry and why men's ministry is so important and what has God been up to in the lives of men across Canada for 30 years. And so we thought it'd be interesting to have Dean on as our current president. And then we brought on Kirk Giles, who was the president before Dean. And Kirk actually worked for the ministry from 1996 to 2020 and just did about every job imaginable in there, including a lot of years as the president. And so we have our current president and our previous president together, and we just had an awesome talk about what God is up to in the life of men.
Yeah, I of course I've worked here for three or 4 years now, and so you feel like you know everything about the ministry, and just to hear Kirk share some of his stories and hopes and his heart, and just kind of what him and Dean are seeing in the lives of men was just really encouraging. And so I think it'll be a really good listen for our listeners, especially if you're not totally familiar with the story of Impactus, and even if you are, I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that'll be an encouragement to you. But this should give you a good understanding of our heart for men, and where we're hoping to see things go as a ministry.
Yeah, it was a really great conversation. I'm excited for the guys to hear it.
Well, yeah, Chris, I don't want to spoil too much more than that, and I'll let you guys get to it. And so let's jump right in. Hey, guys, before we jump into the interview, I just want to let you know that this podcast has been brought to you by Deeks Insurance. They're a licensed insurance broker providing access to preferred rates on home and car insurance to faith-based organizations, academic institutions, and charities, all the while supporting ministry advancement here in Canada. Call Deeks Insurance today at 1-800-240-5283 or go online to deeksinsurance.ca to find out how much you could be saving. All right, let's jump into today's episode.
All right. Well, welcome, Mr. President and Mr. President. So glad to have Dean Brenton and Kirk Giles here on the call. Dean is our current president at Impactus, and Kirk was the president and many other roles over the years, starting back when it was Promise Keepers Canada. So, Kirk, I wanted to ask you, what were your roles all exactly, if you can remember?
Oh
And
man,
and
my very first role was administrative assistant for my dad, and
okay.
I remember this is going to go way back. This is going to tell you my age. I remember spending literally 3 days a month faxing out newsletters to men all over Eastern Canada.
Wow.
It was wild. That was my very first role. And then I moved into what we used to call field ministry, which is church relations work, and then moved into overseeing all of our conferences across the country, and then overseeing our operations. And then they ran out of ideas for me and said, "Why don't you just move into this other role?" And the rest
Might
is
as well.
history. Yeah.
Yeah. So you started, I just looked it up today. So 96 is what your LinkedIn said. That's when you
Yeah.
started.
Yep.
Okay. So that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's quite a long
I
time until
was I
2020.
Yeah, I was at the very first, the inaugural event, the official inauguration of Promise Keepers Canada at Church on the Queensway in Toronto in 1995. And I was
Wow.
there as an observer, as someone who was interested in the ministry because of impact in my own life. And then within a few months after that, my dad and I were asked if we would jump in and join the staff that was starting in Canada. So, yeah.
Wow. So really from the ground up, you got to see a lot of different things. And what was it, Kirk, about men's ministry in particular that drew you to Promise Keepers at the time?
Yeah, in our case, it was really because the God had used the ministry to reconcile a broken relationship between my dad and I,
Oh,
and
wow.
we had gone through a whole bunch of difficulties in my teen years, and then we really weren't on great terms. And somebody brought us to a Promise Keepers event, a smaller seminar out in Detroit, and we went there, and it
Mm.
just changed our relationship. And we both wanted to give back to the ministry as it was starting in Canada. And so that's really how it all started.
Wow. Okay. And Dean, to you, like what drew you to Impactus? How did you become the current president? How did that come about?
Well, it's Kirk's fault, actually.
Okay.
It literally is, actually. I was started helping with some Promise Keepers events out on the East Coast, and working with Rick for Kirk and some of the team. We brought some events to Newfoundland, and then just got appointed to serve on the advisory board, eventually on the board, and then as I was serving on the board, actually as the board chair, and of course the pandemic was starting to unfold around that time as well. Kirk made it known to me that he was going to be stepping down, and so we started the process. But he tapped me on the shoulder and said basically that I should consider, and I
Wow.
thought he was crazy. And but a long story short, I did wrestle that out with God, and decided to resign the board and step away from all the official leadership capacities and throw my hat into the proverbial ring. And the rest is history. So yeah, I wouldn't be here actually if it wasn't for Kirk and that conversation and his friendship over the years.
Okay. Well, I might not either, as I think about that, because Kirk, you knew my dad
Yeah,
back in the day, and
yeah,
he was a donor and supporter of
yeah,
PK at the time, and so when this job opened up, I went, oh, I know this ministry already, and Kirk, you'd moved on by that point,
yeah.
but I remember chatting with you over the years and
Your
meeting you at
dad,
the odd events.
your dad was part, when I first became president, I had a small group of men who were like my personal prayer team. And your
Okay.
dad was one of those men that were on my personal prayer team. And just love your dad, and so grateful for his input in my life. So for those of you who are excited about Dean being president, you're welcome. For those of you who aren't as excited about Dean being president, it really wasn't my fault, and everything else he just said was not true.
Nice try. Nice try.
Dueling presidents. We're off to a good start. So Dean, I'll ask you. So you've been there. So you've been here since about 2020. That was about the same time as
January
Kirk left?
21, I began.
Okay.
Yep.
And so you jumped in kind of in the middle of the pandemic. Our events were virtual for a while. We couldn't gather in person, and that thankfully has changed over the last couple of years. But as you have jumped in, and even thinking about your time before when you were on the board and connected, what are some of the challenges that you've noticed that you see men facing as we talk to men all across the country and increasingly across the world? What are some common challenges that you see facing men in your role?
Yeah, I jumped in the midst of a president change, of course, the pandemic, and then a rebrand. So Kirk set me up real well
Right.
with lots of
Good
internal
timing.
challenges. But it was yeah, just seeing some of the I think aftermath of COVID and some of the realities of ministry. I mean, it did shape ministry, and it will probably for years to come. But some of the ones that I've alluded to in other settings just include like things like distraction. I just think there is so much
Mm,
coming our way every day, with our phones next to us almost 24/7. Distraction's a huge issue, like just the division in our society and in the church, sadly, is a major issue. And the whole one that keeps coming up is the isolation and just general
yeah.
discouragement of guys that are just feeling alone, that there is no one there for them. And we see some of the terrible examples of that, but just this general sense that yeah, I'm on my own here, and how do I get myself out of this?
Yeah, and Kirk, I'll ask you the same question, and curious as to uh, does that look different from your time in '96 when you started? We didn't have the social media, we didn't have our phones. You know, the technology was different. You talked about faxing out
Yeah.
information, right? The web was not our friend at that point. Are there things that Dean just shared that are kind of consistent from your time when you worked at Impactus? Were there things that were different? How do those things compare?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, the core issues have stayed the same, at the root of it over the years. They sometimes manifest themselves in different ways,
Hmm.
but the core issues are very consistent. And, I think maybe the one big difference that I've seen is um, You've moved to a generation that feels quite helpless at the state of
Mm,
everything around them. So, guys who are trying to build families today or start their career today feel like they're a little bit in over their head.
right,
There's this reality of the economic realities. There's the political climate. There's the employment realities. There's so many different challenges, and I think that is probably a bit different than what it was when the ministry first started, in the sense of people were a little bit more financially stable
right.
at that time, and I think this has really manifested itself in a lot of ways. And for a lot of guys today, you see it showing up kind of on the either extreme of fight or flight. Right.
Right.
So we look at the state of the world and we just get mad at it. Um,
Yeah.
and so we're mad, and now we're mad at everybody and everything. And how do we respond in this moment? Because we feel helpless on the inside. We don't know how else to deal with our helplessness. And then there's
Hmm.
the opposite side of that is just the flight side, where we kind of bury ourselves in social
Hmm.
media or playing video games or whatever, and that just turns into a space where we're trying to hide ourselves away from the realities of the stress that we're feeling in the world.
Hmm.
So I think that's maybe one of the biggest differences that I've seen
Right.
over the years from when I started to where we are today.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when I was in my early 20s, in the early 2000s, which is when I first met Impactus Promise Keepers, and at that time there really was that push of, all right, young men, like find a godly girl and do the
Yep.
right thing and get married and have kids and get a house and work hard. And I was a pastor before I moved over to Impactus, and when I was marrying young couples over the last number of years, it's not that easy to buy a house anymore in
Mhm.
Canada, right? It's incredibly difficult. And even to find a rental is incredibly difficult. And inflation went crazy and interest rates went nuts. And so for the young man who, wants to maybe do all those things, it is a very different world. And that's the part where, I look at my kids who are teenagers now and I'm going, all right, well, how are they going to afford a house in 10 years, when they're at
Yep.
that point? You guys have, young adult children. Your kids are in that zone now of trying to figure that out, and so that is interesting, that difference from the 90s till now, and what young men are facing. It's challenging for sure.
And
um
it's
Go ahead, Dean.
I think it's particularly complex too, because guys are wired to fix things, right, and make
Mhm.
things
Sure.
better, or
Mhm.
make it right. And that sense of helplessness that Kirk talks about, like, it is hard for guys to process. Like, and I think that does result in that kind of frustration and spillover into anger and angst, and they don't know what to do with it. And oftentimes it's in destructive behaviors or unhelpful behaviors that
Right.
just pulls them away, right? So it is pretty complex, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, so what would we say then to the young men in particular, the young guys who are in that spot, and maybe work feels out of reach, or housing feels out of reach, or marriage feels out of reach? Marriage is happening a lot later. People are having kids a lot later.
Mhm.
How would we encourage the young man today who's kind of in that zone and isn't quite sure what to do? I'll ask you first, Kirk.
Yeah, I think that what I encourage younger guys with is this idea that God has always been faithful, so you need to dive in deep to your faith. Um, and
Hmm.
what feels like a helpless situation in the moment is an opportunity actually for you to experience the faithfulness of God in your own life.
Hmm.
Instead of you feeling the need of, I have to fix all the problems and make everything the way it should be. By diving deeper into your faith, you are landing in a spot that says, God, I actually don't know what to do with this.
Right.
But because God's always been faithful, because God's always provided for needs, and generations of families can tell stories of how God's provided for needs.
Right.
I think it's an opportunity for a generation of young men to really experience something that maybe they've not experienced before in their life in terms of their walk with God.
Yeah, that's King Jehoshaphat's prayer when Israel was facing an overwhelming enemy. And I love it because it's short and it's pithy and it kind of rhymes. That he just said, "I don't know what to do, but my eyes are on you."
Yep.
And as you say, we don't have the solutions necessarily, and we can't personally influence economic policy or anything
Yep.
like that. But we serve a God who has the solution, right? There is a way forward, and that's where we go. That's the source that we're looking for. What would you say, Dean, to that young man out there?
Yeah, I think you actually hit on something there, Chris. Just it sounds almost cliche. It sounds almost Sunday school kind of pat answer, but
Yeah.
getting our eyes on God, who is unchangeable, who is completely faithful, who is sovereign in the midst of a chaotic world. There's something about that we need as young men, I think, need to get anchored in, because there are so many things that pull us away from that, and it feels like that God is not sovereign, but He is.
Hmm.
The other
Mhm.
piece I think I'd say with that like this faith journey, like it's the Peterson line, right? It's the long obedience in the same direction. It's the
Hmm.
Right.
accumulation of little things that make a difference. And so even when things are overwhelming, or you don't know where you're going to come up with the finances, or culture is going to hell in a handbasket, like it's staying faithful and consistent in those little things, the day by day with your spouse, in your daily walk with Jesus, that matter, and the accumulation actually matters, right? And it will make a huge difference in your life and in the years
Mhm.
ahead.
And I want to add to what you're just saying, Dean, and build off of that. I was just talking to a guy the other day about this very thing, and he was struggling with, like, I can't be a success in the current climate that I find
Mhm.
myself in. And I asked him the question of, well, can you give me your definition of success?
Mhm.
Uh, because that, I think, is the thing we have to press into. When a guy is feeling like everything's hopeless, I can't do this or this or this, um, uh, press into, well, what does success actually look like? And
Mhm.
that this has been one of the core issues for men for as long as I've been working with men, is the whole conversation about success. And because no guy wants to be a failure, we all want to succeed at whatever we're doing. Um, but I think that what happens for a lot of guys is we define success based on everything else that the world and the culture has taught us to define success as, even in our own minds, whatever we've defined success to be.
Mhm.
And what I always say to guys is every single one of those things always comes to an end. Like everything you come up with, you're you're either going to fail or you're going to hit the mark, but then it's over. And then
Right.
what? And then what? Then what's your next definition of success? And so what I try to talk to guys about all the time is you got to have an internal picture of success, building off of what
Mhm.
Dean was saying. Live today for the day you're going to stand before Jesus.
Mhm.
Live today for the moment when Jesus is going to say to you, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That that's the ultimate pinnacle of success, because that's a success that actually matters beyond your lifetime. It's a success that matters forever, and so you make those individual decisions that Dean was talking about when you're able to keep your eyes on a good, healthy definition of success that keeps eternity in mind as opposed to just the moment.
As you're saying that, Kirk, it reminds me, I think you just finished reading this recently, and I did as well over the summer, Mark Sayer's book,
Hmm.
Platforms to Pillars.
Yep.
And it's the same concept, right? It's not living for trying to build a platform or success by the world standards. It's building a life that's a pillar in our society, in our homes,
Mhm.
in our communities. That's the long game, right? And that's what I think you're alluding to, and I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, there's so much good we can do every single day, right? And as men, it's so easy for life to be full of work and family stuff and church stuff and activities and all those types of things. And that's the arena that we're in every day. But even in those places, that's where those decisions we make day by day, as you say, Kirk, with the eternal consequences in mind, and living not so much for the things that Scripture says will burn up one day,
Yep.
right? All of our
Yep.
earthly successes will disappear in fire. What will be left will be the good stuff, right? The virtues, the
That's right.
holiness, the godly things that we did. So as we talk about then, those are some of the challenges that men are facing. Where do you see God working in men right now that's encouraging to you in this cultural moment? And Kirk, you've moved into pastoral ministry since you left
Mhm.
Impactus, so you're seeing men kind of up front in the trenches with your church family there. Dean, in your role as president, where are you encouraged by what you see God doing? We'll go to you first, Dean.
Yeah, we just did a podcast actually just recorded recently around this whole quiet revival piece and the
Mhm.
resurgence of young men who have an
Yeah.
interest in faith. Now, there are probably a lot of contributing factors to that, but I do believe God's at work through it, even if some of the factors are not necessarily great factors. But there is an appetite and a drawback, I think, for young men in particular, that is pretty spectacular. We probably, if someone had said, in 2025, a few years ago, that young men would be leading kind of a return to the church, we're like, yeah, you're crazy.
Mm.
But we're seeing it, and I think that spillover is shaking up the church a little bit. And how do we respond to that? And along with that, we talked a little at our summit, Chris, around the spiritual devotion level that we continually see with the men we survey, that there is a hunger and a desire to follow Jesus. And some guys, do struggle and want to get better, but there is a good level of spiritual interest and spiritual growth that is encouraging to see.
Yeah, and you think even in the cultural moment that we're in, which we talk about a lot. So when we're recording this, of course, in America, just a few weeks ago, Charlie Kirk was just assassinated, which lots of men are talking about. And beyond the conversations of political violence and polarization and all those things that are around it, every pastor I know has seen some guy showing up at their church on Sundays, and they're asking questions, and there's something about it that has got them seeking and searching. And so even in the tragedy of that moment, there is still a hunger there that's being stirred up. And I think the church and ministries like Impactus are uniquely positioned to help men wrestle through some of those questions that are coming up in this moment. Kirk, what about you in your time at Impactus as well as your pastoral role? Where are you encouraged these days?
I was reflecting on this earlier this morning for a sermon I'm writing at church for this weekend. And uh, so I've been in ministry just a little over 30 years now. And I have to say, the things that Dean was just talking about are the things that myself and many, many other people have been praying for and
Mm,
hoping for as long as I've been alive, never mind in
mhm,
ministry. Like it is a very surreal moment. For those of us who are in Christian leadership, it's a very surreal moment to see the kind of spiritual hunger that we are seeing happening, this quiet
mm.
revival that you've talked about. So I see the same things. I'm deeply encouraged and excited by what's happening on that front. Um, I think, how that's also manifesting itself. At one point, there was a huge, huge statistical issue with fatherlessness in our culture. And while that's still a reality, statistically, you are seeing men step up and become more engaged in the life of their kids.
Hmm.
You're seeing men become more serious about their marriages. You're seeing men step into places of serving and leadership that they never in a million years dreamed they were going to.
Mhm.
So I am, yeah, it's all a little bit surreal to me. It's because I am firmly convinced we are living in a moment that is the work of God in our culture to bring people to Jesus and to bring men to Jesus.
That's so amazing, and I like how you frame that, Kirk. In light of what Dean was saying, of just, hey, we've been praying for this for decades, right? For these things to happen. I met a man a couple of months ago down here where I live near Windsor, Ontario, and we were just getting to know each other, and I mentioned Impactus, and he went, "Oh, Promise Keepers, right?" He's like, "Oh, back in the early 2000s, we would drive up to Queensway Cathedral at the time in Toronto, and we would go up for those events." And he'd be in his 60s now, I would guess, but he was saying, "Man, did that ever help me become a better dad? Did that ever push me to be a better husband?" And being in that, the church with 4,000 other guys and lifting our voices in worship and just seeing we all want the same thing, and we all love Jesus, and we're all working at this together. And you think, yeah, like that's a couple decades ago, that he is still grateful that Impactus made a difference in his life in that way.
I was at the gym working out the other day, and I had a guy just walk up to me. He goes, "Excuse me." He goes, "Is your name Kirk by any chance?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I just wanted to say thank you for the ministry that you guys did." He goes, I went to a bunch of your events and God just changed my life." And
Wow.
he goes, "I won't bug you anymore. I just wanted to say thank you." And no idea who this guy is, never met him
Mm.
before, probably been at the same gym with him before, but he just randomly recognized, and it was amazing. It was very cool.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so we are celebrating 30 years of Impactus, and Kirk, yeah, you've been there for basically all of it, I think, and you still write for us now as one of our contributors, which we appreciate a lot, and speak into the issue of men's leadership and men's ministry. For both of you, I'd be curious to know, as you've both been involved in the ministry for a while, what's something in your role as president that you have learned about men that maybe you didn't know before? And that might be a bit harder for you, Kirk, because you've basically your entire life you've been here. But what's something that you learned about men that you didn't know before? I'll ask you first, Dean.
Well, Kirk and I have had kind of divergent pathways in terms of, like, I came from the ministry background into this role. Kirk left this role into the ministry background. So it's unique perspectives. I came from like a church ministries kind of world where men's ministry in particular was not really highlighted. We would do some events, but it was often very difficult. And most churches didn't really celebrate it or put a lot of energy into it. I think one of the things I've learned is that there are some really great things happening in men's lives and in churches, men's ministries across the country and beyond, that I was probably unaware of before. And I'm seeing signs of life and hope. It's not every church, and not every church is going to have like a full on, kind of men's ministry. But there are some guys out there who are really serious about it and are doing some really great things. They're reaching in there to their communities. They're engaged with young men. They're mentoring. They're doing discipleship. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think it was an eye opener. Like, no, there are guys who are doing this and they're all in. Like, they really believe this and they want to pour into guys and make a difference for the next generation. I love that.
Yeah, that's always exciting. And I think we have this impressed me in joining Impactus, and Kirk, you would have been involved in getting these things going. There really is an amazing network of men's leaders around the country, and regional leaders and local leaders. So we really do get to hear a lot of cool stories about what God's doing in all different parts of the country, which is great. Kirk, what about you? What's something you learned about working with men during your time here?
Uh, I think the thing that I learned the most, that I probably underestimated, was how much men need friendships with other men.
Hmm.
I think I always had this mindset of guys were fairly independent, didn't really want relationship or friendship with other guys. But I really learned just how alone a lot of guys feel in the real stuff. Like, yeah, there's the task stuff that they can do and they can go and do that on their own. But in the real stuff of life, how many guys feel alone? And there were just a bunch of things that we did over the years where we would take some type of initiative or minister in some type of way that it would jump out at me like, oh man, these guys feel like they're by themselves,
Yeah.
and and how critical it was to keep pushing on. Hey guys, we need each other. We got to be in friendship with each other. We got to walk together. That was a big lesson for me along the way.
Well, and you can see you learning that lesson, Kirk, and just the influence of that, because we're still talking about those things,
Yeah.
years later. And we got some feedback from a guy in the last few months who just wrote in. Sometimes people just comment, "Oh, the devotional today really, was helpful," or whatever. And he made that comment along those lines of just, thank you for that constant encouragement to to be with a band of brothers and to find some trustworthy guys. And he said that's not always easy, but I've been doing that and trying to do that, and I see the benefit. And so it's cool to see over the 30 years, how some of those themes developed, and we're really seeing some amazing fruit coming out of that
That's
from
great.
those conversations, which is cool. So I asked each of you, and when I sent you these questions, Kirk, I don't know if you love this question a lot, but I said, tell me one story about one man. And you just didn't love it because you could tell 1,000 stories. So to narrow down to one is hard. But I said, tell me one story about one man who God got a hold of through Impactus that you got to witness in your time as president. And so again, yeah, we all could share lots of stories, but I'm curious as to where you landed on the one. And so I'll ask you first, Dean. What's just one of many examples as we're celebrating 30 years of Impactus of something God did in the life of a man that you got to see?
Yeah, there's two or three that pop immediately, and I was going to use another one initially, and even as we're just talking in this conversation, my mind went back to just after I started in this role, and of course we're in the pandemic, and we're trying to do some virtual events, and I couldn't travel at the time, but our team in Ontario were putting the virtual event together and doing some recording. And I went to Halifax to record with Leonard Anderson at the Rock Church. And I remember being at that recording. We're stitching this conference together digitally, and thinking, as I sat there listening, and Leonard's an amazing speaker. He always is, lots of energy and just brings the word. But I'm listening. I'm going, is this going to matter? Is this going to land with anyone out there? And little did I know, after we put it all together and pushed it out and made it live, there was a young guy in Red Deer, Alberta. His name was Chris, who was in his basement at a very low point in his life. And the Impactus conference digitally reached him at that moment and ignited a fire in him. And he started getting involved in his church. He reached out to Impactus, started doing some of the Bible studies, and got involved with our network. Now he's in training for ministry. And that's kind of the full circle piece of my lack of faith thought, oh God, can you really use a video like online ministry? Right. And God kind of said, of course I can use anything. Right. And so that was one of the coolest stories I think that's emerged from that initial time. And there's been many others since. So, yeah.
Yeah, Chris's story is great, and we got to celebrate that, through a video about his testimony, and that kind of reminds me even of what you were saying earlier, Kirk, of just where, for men who feel like I don't know what to do, and can anything, good come out of where I'm at right now, and you say, hey, well, God knows, right? God has the solution. And that was a moment where Impactus was just struggling through the pandemic, and on paper maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense, but God just breathed His Spirit powerfully on it and did something amazing, even in a kind of impossible situation. That's such a good story. Chris's story is great. What about you, Kirk? You have decades worth to draw on. I'm curious as to the one that stood out to you to share today.
This is a brutal question, man. Because there's going to be some guy out there listening to this podcast who's going to be like, Giles didn't tell my story. What's
right?
For me, I always talked a lot about the impact that men can have. That we can either have an impact that's going to cause a lot of harm and a lot of hurt in people, or we can have an impact that's going to be a ripple effect felt for a very long time. And so I remember a guy who was in Manitoba, and he came to one of our conferences. God radically got a hold of his heart and life. That changed the way he was a father and a husband. But then the other part of the story that I just deeply loved was him talking about, he contacted me one day and saying, hey, Kirk, this is what God's done in my life and how He's changed my family because of this. And by the way, God's just called us to move to a third world country as a family to care for orphans in this country. And I thought, what an incredible, who in the world would have ever predicted that one random guy showing up at one of our events would turn into him and his family traveling to a third world country and helping orphans in those places, like
Yeah.
moving. It's just like, yeah, very humbling and very, very cool.
Yeah, amazing. That's such a good story. And yeah, again, thousands more stories like that. And the one story that I thought of, so I've been here about 2 years now, and I had just been here maybe 2 weeks, and someone emailed into the ministry from Bangladesh. And so they found us online. They were reading some stuff. And so they just kind of emailed us randomly, and he said Bangladesh is a Muslim country. He grew up Muslim. He was having some doubts. He had some questions. It wasn't safe for him to really ask those questions in his country, and he could lose his family and lose his job. And so he had to be under the radar a little bit. But he and I just started emailing back and forth, and he would email his questions, and I would do my best to answer them, and we would chat. And he had a Bible, and so we were wrestling through the Bible together. And then I happened to know a missionary in Bangladesh, and so I got phone numbers and just said, why don't you two talk, and you can talk in your own language, and maybe even get together. And so long story short, he ended up giving his life to Jesus through the conversation and through the missionary. And so that happened in my first month of being here, and I thought this is a pretty cool place to work, where just God is reaching out all across Canada. Obviously, we're seeing in our time now at Impactus, especially through YouVersion and our devotionals there, we have a big reach into America now, but we're also seeing this global thing happening, which is so cool. And again, one of those things, Kirk, I'm sure you guys were praying for and looking forward to in all of your many years here. And so where God is just at work in kind of a new way, and we're leaning into the technology that we have and the platforms that we have to do that. But the ministry to men is happening in our events. It's happening through our devotionals and articles. It's happening online. It's happening across the world, which is just such a cool moment to be a part of here at Impactus. So I'm curious, as I'll just ask you, I think, one more question here. And so we're celebrating these 30 years. What would be your hope as you look ahead to the next 10, 20, 30 years for Impactus? What is your hope for men's ministry, for this particular ministry? Kirk, I'll ask you first.
I wanted to hear Dean's grand vision for the next 30 years, but the
Dean will land the plane for us in a minute.
okay. I love that story you just told, Chris, because that is, before I left, those are the kinds of things that we were praying and trusting and believing that God was going to open up for the ministry. So here's my hope and prayer for the next 30 years of Impactus. My hope and prayer is that God would multiply the favor over this ministry, to see men who already know Jesus go deeper in Christ, and to see men anywhere in the world come to know Jesus and come to discover the transformational change that can happen in their life when they walk with Jesus.
Yeah.
And that through the lives of these men, that there will be a continued silent revival that happens not just where all three of us are from, but all over the world. We don't need to bang the drum and say, hey, look at how great we are. We want men to see how great Jesus is. And that is my hope for the next 30 years of Impactus.
Yeah, amazing. Dean, I don't know how you're going to top that answer, but
I can't top that answer. We can shut it down right here. I would just say we've kind of crystallized the approach in the last couple of years, in particular, around saying that the ministry operates in two lanes of the highway: direct to men and direct to the local church. And I think my hope and dream for the next 30 years, I was trying to calculate how old I'll be in 30 years, but let's not go there. Number one, that guys would see us as a trusted voice, as allies and friends, that in the isolation and the disconnection of our world, that they would realize there is a mighty remnant of men out there who still love Jesus and want to walk with them and point them to the gospel, to the word of God, to discipleship that can change their lives. And secondly, in the second lane, that churches, pastors, men's leaders would see us as their greatest cheerleaders, and that we sincerely want to serve the local church and help them in their vision and their dreams. And if we could accomplish those two things, or even attempt to accomplish those things, that would be an amazing 30 years ahead.
Hmm.
Oh, it's such an exciting moment to be a part of this ministry, and yeah, even in celebrating the past 30 years, God's already done such amazing things in that time. It's exciting to think that the God who doesn't change is still leading the ministry forward for the next 30 years, and this God is very interested in what's going on in the lives of the men that He created, and He created us as men in this time on purpose, and so it's exciting to be a part of what's going to happen next, and so. Former Mr. President Kirk, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind praying for Impactus and praying for any guy who's listening to this, however you feel led to wrap us up.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Father, thank you so much for your faithfulness in and through this ministry over the past 30 years. Countless thousands of men who you have impacted through this ministry. Lord, we are so grateful to you. And God, as we think about the men who are today trying to figure out what it means to be a man, and men for generations to come who will deal with the same questions, I pray that you would move in beautiful, powerful ways in the hearts of men to help them be anchored in Jesus Christ,
Mhm.
to help their lives have eternal significance, to help these men live in such a way that the reality of Jesus in them would just overflow, and they would have an impact in places they never even imagined or dreamed was possible.
Mm.
Lord, would you use this ministry to do exactly what Dean has just laid out? Would you bless and give your favor to the work of their hands, so that as a team, as a ministry, they would be an instrument of yours to help point more and more men to Jesus? And I pray this in your name. Amen.